Picture the Sahara at midnight, when the tourist caravans have stilled and the last embers of campfires fade into ash. The moon hangs low over an ocean of sand, its light turning the dunes into frozen waves, silent, vast, and impossibly old. The air is cold now, though by noon it will scorch. The wind moves across the crests like breath over skin, carrying nothing but dust and the faint whisper of something long forgotten. Beneath your feet, or rather, beneath the feet of anyone standing in this vastness, lies a secret written in stone and sediment. The Sahara is not what it appears to be. It is not an eternal wasteland, not a primordial void untouched by life. It is a graveyard of rivers, a tomb of forests, a monument to a world drowned not in water, but in sand. What if this desert, stretching across nearly 4 million square miles, was once draped in grass? What if hippos wallowed in its lakes and giraffes grazed beneath acacia trees that have not existed here for 6,000 years? What if the largest hot desert on Earth is not ancient at all, but young, tragically young in geological terms? The Sahara remembers, not in words, but in layers. In the faint tracery of riverbeds, visible only from space. In the bones of crocodiles found hundreds of miles from the nearest water. In the silent testimony of rock art painted by hands that knew rain. This is not a story of what might have been. It is a story of what was and what will be again. Because the desert, for all its stillness, is not permanent. It breathes, it transforms. And every grain of sand beneath that moonlight was once something else entirely. Centuries pass in the desert without incident. Dunes shift. Stones crack in the heat. The wind erases footprints as quickly as they are made. To the untrained eye, the Sahara is a blank page, a place of absence. But to those who know how to listen, the desert is anything but silent. In the 1980s, scientists began aiming radar, arrays and satellite sensors at the Sahara, peeling back the surface layer by layer. What they discovered was astonishing. Not emptiness, but the skeleton of an entire ecosystem. Beneath the sand, invisible to the naked eye, lay the ghost veins of vanished rivers. Channels as wide as the Nile, now buried under hundreds of feet of sediment. Fossilized lake beds stretching for miles, their shores marked by deposits of ancient shells and fish bones. The faint outlines of vegetation patterns, detectable only in the subtle variations of reflected light. These are not anomalies. They are everywhere. The Sahara is laced with them, a hidden network of waterways that once pulsed with life. Satellite imagery reveals riverbeds branching like neurons across the desert floor, some of them older than human civilization, others abandoned only in the Bronze Age. Ground-penetrating radar confirms what the satellites suggest. Beneath the dunes of Mauritania, Libya, and Chad lie entire drainage systems, complete with tributaries, deltas, and floodplains. In some places, the past rises to the surface. Farmers in the Sahel occasionally unearth enormous freshwater clamshells while digging wells. In the Tenor Desert, paleontologists have found fossilized tree trunks, their roots still anchored in ancient soil. In the White Desert of Egypt, wind erosion exposes layers of limestone formed from the compacted remains of marine life. Proof that even this desolation was once submerged beneath a shallow sea. The desert, it turns out, is not one thing. It is many things, layered atop one another like pages in a book written over millions of years. And the most recent chapter, the Green chapter, ended only yesterday in geological terms. To understand how a desert becomes a garden, one must look not at the land, but at the sky. More precisely, at the angle of the Earth as it tilts and wobbles through space. Every 21,000 years, the planet undergoes a subtle shift known as axial precession, a slow gyration in the orientation of Earth as rotational axis, like a spinning top beginning to wobble. This wobble changes the timing of the seasons relative to Earth's position in its orbit. And that change, seemingly minor, is enough to rewrite the climate of entire continents. Around 14,500 years ago, as the last ice age began to loosen its grip on the northern hemisphere, this orbital shift triggered a profound transformation. The African monsoon system, which typically drenches the equatorial belt and peters out in the Sahel, suddenly surged northward. Moist air from the Atlantic swept inland, colliding with the hot desert surface and releasing torrential rains across regions that had been arid for millennia. The change was not gradual. Within centuries, a blink in Earth's timeline, the Sahara transformed. Rain fell not in occasional showers, but in seasonal deluges. Rivers carved new channels through ancient stone. Lakes swelled and merged, forming vast inland seas. Grasses sprouted from soil that had known only dust. Acacias took root. Herds of antelope moved north, following the bloom. This was the African humid period, a climatic window that would last nearly 9,000 years. During this time, the Sahara was not a desert at all, but a mosaic of wetlands, savannas, and seasonal rivers, a landscape more akin to modern-day Kenya or Tanzania than the barren expanse we see today. The monsoons came like clockwork, year after year, sustaining ecosystems that had no memory of drought. The Sahara bloomed, and into this green world came the first witnesses, human beings carrying spears and stories, ready to claim the newborn paradise. They came from the south, following the rains. Hunter-gatherers, fishermen, early pastoralists, people whose ancestors had survived the harsh margins of the Ice Age, now drawn north by the promise of water and game. They moved in small bands at first, testing the edges of the Green Sahara, setting up seasonal camps near lakes and rivers. And then, as the rains continued and the herds multiplied, they stayed. Archaeologists working in what is now Libya, Algeria, and Niger have uncovered the remnants of these early settlers. Campsites marked by fire-cracked stones and scattered pottery shards. Burial sites where the dead were laid to rest facing the rising sun. Middens thick with the bones of catfish, tilapia, and Nile perch, species that no longer exist anywhere near these sites. But the most striking evidence is painted on stone. Across the highlands of the Sahara, in places like Tassili Najir and the Caucasus Mountains, ancient artists left behind a visual archive of their world. They painted giraffes with impossibly long necks, herds of antelope, elephants raising their trunks. They painted themselves, hunters with bows, dancers in ceremonial masks, women grinding grain. They painted boats, reed boats with high prows, gliding across waters that have not existed here for 5,000 years. This was not a transient presence. These were communities, perhaps numbering in the tens of thousands, who lived full lives in a landscape we now consider uninhabitable. They herded cattle, one of the earliest instances of pastoralism in Africa. They fished the lakes, traded goods across vast distances, and developed complex social rituals. Some sites show evidence of semi-permanent structures, clay hearths, and storage pits, the hallmarks of sedentary life. They were not primitive. They were adaptive, resourceful, and deeply attuned to the rhythms of the land. And for nearly 9,000 years, they thrived. Meanwhile, far to the east, along the narrow ribbon of the Nile, another story was beginning to unfold, one that would outlast the Green Sahara itself. Imagine a body of water so vast that its shoreline stretches beyond the horizon in every direction. A lake so deep that storms could churn its surface into waves tall enough to capsize boats. A freshwater sea larger than any lake on Earth today, fed by rivers draining from highlands hundreds of miles away. This was Lake Megachad. At its peak, around 6,000 years ago, it covered an area of approximately 150,000 square miles, larger than the Caspian Sea, larger than the Great Lakes combined. Its waters lapped against the foothills of the Tibesti Mountains to the north, and spread southward into what is now northern Nigeria. Fish teemed in its depths. Crocodiles basked along its shores. Fishing communities built villages on stilts above the shallows, their children growing up to the rhythm of waves and the call of wirebirds. Today, Lake Chad is a shadow of its former self, a shallow, fluctuating pool barely a tenth of its mid-20th century size, further diminished by modern irrigation and climate change. But the ancient lake's boundaries are still visible from space, traced in pale sediment and fossil beaches. Mega Chad was not alone. Across the Green Sahara, dozens of similar lakes dotted the landscape. In what is now the Bodili Depression, today one of the dustiest places on Earth, there once lay Lake Mega Fezan, another inland sea fed by rains and runoff. In the Libyan desert, paleolakes formed and dried in cycles, leaving behind layers of diatomaceous earth and microscopic skeletons of algae that once bloomed in their waters. These were not marginal puddles. They were thriving aquatic ecosystems, complete with food chains, migratory patterns, and seasonal floods. The people who lived along their shores developed sophisticated fishing techniques, built boats, and likely navigated between lakeside settlements, creating networks of trade and culture across the watery heart of the Sahara. As the centuries passed and the rains faltered, these lakes began to shrink, slowly at first, then catastrophically, leaving behind only salt flats and the memory of abundance. The rivers of the Green Sahara were not like the Nile, eternal and predictable. They were seasonal, temperamental, flowing in torrents during the monsoon months and dwindling to stagnant pools in the dry season. Yet for those who understood their rhythms, these rivers were highways of life. One such river system, now known only from satellite imagery and sediment cores, wound its way from the highlands of the Ahagar Plateau westward across the desert, eventually draining into the Atlantic. Another, the Kofra River, flowed east from the Tibesti Mountains toward the Nile Valley, cutting through what is now featureless sand. These rivers were lined with gallery forests, narrow bands of trees and shrubs that clung to the riverbanks, providing shade, fruit, and shelter for countless species. The people who followed these rivers were nomadic, but not aimless. They moved with the seasons, tracking the migration of game, fishing the rivers during the wet months, and retreating to higher ground when the waters rose. They knew every bend, every waterhole, every hidden spring. They carved messages into the rocks, marking sacred sites and territorial boundaries. They left behind tools, stone blades, harpoon points, grinding stones, scattered along the ancient riverbeds like breadcrumbs through time. Here is an odd fact, one that defies the modern image of the Sahara. In the Tenor Desert of Niger, paleontologists have discovered the fossilized remains of crocodiles. Not one or two, but dozens, some of them enormous, indicating a population that thrived for thousands of years. Crocodiles are freshwater reptiles, dependent on rivers and lakes. Their presence in the heart of the Sahara is not an anomaly. It is proof. Proof that this desert was once alive with water, and that the hunters who painted boats on stone were not imagining, but remembering. In the central Sahara, in a region so remote that few modern travelers ever reach it, there are cliffs painted with the dreams of a vanished people. The site is called Tassili Najer, a plateau in southern Algeria where erosion has sculpted the sandstone into towers, arches, and overhangs. And on these surfaces, sheltered from the wind and sun, are thousands of images, some faded, some still vivid, depicting a world unrecognizable today. There are scenes of daily life, women dancing in flowing garments, men leading herds of cattle, children playing near water. There are hunting scenes, archers stalking antelope, nets cast into rivers thick with fish. There are ritual scenes, masked figures gathered around what might be altars, their arms raised toward the sky. And there are animals, not the camels and scorpions of the modern Sahara, but elephants, rhinos, giraffes, and hippos. creatures that require vast amounts of water and vegetation to survive. The artists used ochre, charcoal, and white clay, grinding the pigments and mixing them with animal fat or plant sap to create paints that have endured for millennia. They painted in layers, often adding new images over old ones, creating a palimpsest of memory stretching back 10,000 years or more. The earliest images are abstract, geometric. The middle period shows the arrival of cattle and the beginnings of pastoralism. The latest images, painted just before the desert returned, depict horses and chariots, the last flourish of a culture that could already sense the end approaching. Similar art exists at the Gilf Khyber Plateau in Egypt, in the Caucasus Mountains of Libya, and at dozens of lesser-known sites scattered across the Sahara. Together, they form a time capsule, a visual record of climate change documented not by scientists, but by the people who lived through it. They painted not to leave a message for the future, but to honor the present, to celebrate the abundance they knew, and perhaps to mourn its passing. Centuries earlier, before the first pyramid rose in Egypt, these artists stood in the Green Sahara and painted boats, knowing that water was the axis around which their world turned. Not all monuments are painted. Some are built of stone, silent and enduring, waiting to be understood. In the desert of southern Egypt, near the modern border with Sudan, there stands a site that predates the pyramids by more than 1,000 years. It is called Nabta Playa, and during the African humid period, it was the shore of a seasonal lake. People gathered here during the monsoons, drawn by the water and the herds that came to drink. And over time, they began to build. First, they erected simple stone markers, upright slabs planted in the earth, aligned with no apparent logic. Then they arranged smaller stones in circles, some surrounding buried cattle skulls and other offerings. Finally, around 6,000 years ago, they constructed something remarkable, a megalithic circle roughly 12 feet in diameter, with stones carefully positioned to mark the cardinal directions, and some researchers believe to track the movement of certain stars. This was not random. The alignments are too precise, the effort too deliberate. Nabta Playa may be one of the earliest examples of astronomical architecture in human history, a precursor to Stonehenge, to the Egyptian temples, to the observatories of the Maya. The people who built it were not sedentary. They were pastoralists, returning year after year to this sacred site, adding stones, refining alignments, encoding their understanding of the cosmos into the landscape. Other megalithic sites have been found scattered across the Sahara: stone circles in Mauritania, standing stones in the Fezzan, cairns and tumuli that may mark ancient trade routes or burial grounds. Most have not been excavated. Many have not even been surveyed. But they hint at a level of social organization and cosmological knowledge far more sophisticated than the term hunter-gatherer suggests. Who were these architects? What did they believe? Did they see the stars as gods, as guides, as ancestors watching from above? We may never know. But the stones remain, half buried in sand, still aligned with the heavens, still marking time in a place where time has lost all meaning. There was no apocalypse, no asteroid strike, no volcanic winter, no sudden catastrophe to mark the end of the Green Sahara. The transformation was slow, almost imperceptible, a gradual dimming of the rains, a lengthening of the dry season, a slow retreat of the monsoons back toward the equator. It began around 7,000 years ago, as the Earth's axial tilt continued its slow precessional drift. The same orbital mechanics that had brought the rains northward now began to reverse. Summer insolation in the northern hemisphere weakened. The monsoon system, which had pumped moisture into the Sahara for millennia, faltered. The rains became less reliable. Rivers that once flowed year-round began to dry up during the hot months. Lakes shrank, exposing mudflats that hardened in the sun. At first, the change was manageable. Herders adjusted their migration routes, following the receding water sources. Communities that had lived along permanent lakes became more mobile, returning to the old nomadic patterns. But as centuries passed, the feedback loops accelerated. Without vegetation to hold the soil in place, the land began to erode. Dust storms became more frequent, reflecting sunlight back into space and cooling the surface, which further suppressed rainfall. The desert fed on itself, spreading outward from the center like a slow-motion wildfire. By 5,500 years ago, the transformation was nearly complete. The Great Lakes had evaporated, leaving behind dry basins encrusted with salt. The rivers had become wadis, dry channels that filled only during rare flash floods. The gallery forests died, their roots unable to reach the sinking water table. The herds moved south, following the Sahel belt where the rains still came. And the people, faced with an impossible choice, began to leave. This was not an extinction of species, but an extinction of landscapes. A green world vanished, replaced by stone and sand, as thoroughly as if it had never existed. The sky had changed, and the Sahara, for the first time in 10,000 years, became a desert again. Imagine standing at the edge of a dying lake, watching the water recede year after year, knowing that your grandchildren might never see it full again. Imagine the conversations around the fire. Should we stay? Can we adapt? Where will we go? The people of the Green Sahara did not abandon their homeland all at once. The migration took centuries, unfolding in waves as different regions dried at different rates. Some communities clung to the last oases, eking out a living from underground springs and the occasional flash flood. Others moved eastward, toward the Nile Valley, where the river, fed by distant Ethiopian highlands, still flowed with reliable abundance. Still others migrated south, following the retreating tree line into the Sahel and beyond. These migrations were not mindless wanderings. They carried with them knowledge, the knowledge of astronomy learned at Nabta Playa, the irrigation techniques developed along the seasonal rivers, the herding practices perfected over millennia. They carried seeds and livestock, pottery styles, and burial customs. They carried stories, myths of a time when the desert bloomed, when fish filled the rivers and the rains never failed. The Nile Valley, which had been sparsely populated during the humid period, began to fill with refugees from the drying Sahara. These newcomers brought skills and ideas that would prove transformative. Some researchers believe that the sudden florescence of Egyptian civilization around 3000 BCE was not a spontaneous development, but the result of a cultural convergence, the meeting of indigenous Nilotic peoples and Saharan migrants, each contributing their accumulated wisdom to the creation of something new. Other migrants moved toward the Mediterranean coast, settling in the Maghreb and influencing the Proto-Berber cultures that would later dominate North Africa. Some moved west, perhaps carrying their cattle herding traditions all the way to the Atlantic coast. The details are murky, lost to time and sand, but the genetic and linguistic evidence suggests a diaspora, a scattering of peoples who once called the Green Sahara home. They did not forget. The memory of water, of green lands and abundant herds, survived in their myths, in their rock art, in the place names they gave to dry wadis that had once been rivers. As the climate shifted, the people shifted with it, carrying the past like seeds, waiting for the right season to bloom again. The Nile Valley, during the African humid period, was something of a backwater. Why settle along a single river when the entire Sahara was dotted with lakes and streams? But as the desert returned, the Nile became the last refuge, a narrow green corridor threading through an ocean of sand. Into this corridor came the descendants of the Saharan pastoralists, bringing with them cattle, which would become central to early Egyptian religion and economy. They brought knowledge of the stars, developed during countless nights of observation in the open desert, which would later inform the precise astronomical alignments of pyramids and temples. They brought an understanding of seasonal cycles, of planting and harvest, of managing water in an arid land. Archaeologists have noted striking similarities between the rock art of the Sahara and the iconography of pre-dynastic Egypt. The cattle cults, for example, which venerated bulls as symbols of strength and fertility, appear first in the Saharan highlands and later in Egyptian temples. The solar symbolism, the emphasis on boats as vehicles for the dead, the careful observation of the horizon, all of these have echoes in the Green Sahara as vanished culture. Some researchers go further, suggesting that the social structures necessary for monumental architecture, the ability to organize large labor forces to coordinate complex projects to maintain hierarchical control, were first developed by Saharan communities managing shared water resources. When the lakes dried, these organizational skills did not disappear. They were transplanted to the Nile, where the annual flood required careful management, coordination, and eventually the centralized authority of a state. This is not to say that Egyptian civilization was caused by climate change, or that it was simply a transplanted Saharan culture. It was a synthesis, a new creation born from the meeting of many influences. But among those influences, the memory of the Green Sahara loomed large. A paradise lost, a golden age when the gods walked among men and the land gave freely of its abundance. Meanwhile, in the desert itself, the sands continued their slow advance, burying the past beneath layers of doom and silence. Walk through the halls of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, past the golden masks and granite sarcophagi, and you will find something curious. Boats. Not models of boats, but full-sized vessels, carefully disassembled and buried near pyramids, intended to carry the pharaohs through the afterlife. These boats are beautiful, sleek, with high prows and sterns, but they are riverboats, designed for the Nile's placid waters. Yet the iconography of boats in Egyptian religion goes deeper than the practical. Boats carried the sun god Ra across the sky each day and through the underworld each night. Boats transported the dead to the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. Boats were sacred, symbolic, central to the cosmology of a civilization that lived along a single river. Now return to the Sahara, to the rock art of Tasli Nazir. There, painted 5,000 years before the pyramids, are boats, dozens of them in ceremonial processions, some carrying what appear to be divine figures or masked priests. The people of the Green Sahara venerated boats not as tools, but as symbols. Symbols of what? Perhaps of abundance, of the waters that sustained them. Perhaps of the journey between life and death, between seasons, between the temporary and the eternal. When these people migrated to the Nile, they brought their boats with them, not as physical objects, but as ideas, as myths, as sacred images encoded in the collective memory. The cattle cults of Egypt, the worship of Hathor, the cow goddess, and Apis, the sacred bull, have clear parallels in Saharan pastoralism. Early Egyptian sun worship, with its emphasis on the daily journey of the solar disk across the sky, mirrors the astronomical observations recorded in the megaliths of Nabta Playa. Even the concept of Mat, the principle of cosmic order and balance, echoes the seasonal rhythms that governed life in the Green Sahara, the cycles of rain and drought, abundance and scarcity that shaped every aspect of existence. Egypt did not inherit the Sahara's culture wholesale. It transformed it, refined it, monumentalized it in stone and gold. But the whisper is there, faint but unmistakable, in the symbols carved into temple walls and the prayers spoken at dawn. The desert, even in its absence, shaped the civilization that rose from its ashes. To understand the Sahara is to understand the machinery of the planet itself, the vast, indifferent systems that govern where rain falls and where deserts spread. Earth's climate is not stable. It is a dynamic, chaotic system driven by the interplay of orbital mechanics, ocean currents, atmospheric circulation, and feedback loops that can amplify tiny changes into continental transformations. The key to the Green Sahara lies in a phenomenon called precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis as it spins through space. Every 21,000 years, this wobble shifts the timing of the seasons relative to Earth's position in its elliptical orbit around the Sun. When the northern hemisphere tilts toward the Sun during its closest approach, perihelion, summers in the north become hotter and more intense. This increased heating strengthens the African monsoon, pulling moisture-laden air from the Atlantic deep into the continent. The result, the Sahara blooms. When the cycle reverses, when northern hemisphere summers occur at aphelion, the farthest point in Earth's orbit, the monsoons weaken, the rains retreat, the desert returns. This cycle has repeated many times over the past few million years. The Sahara is not permanently arid. It is rhythmically arid, pulsing between green and brown like a slow heartbeat. Core samples taken from the Atlantic seafloor just off the coast of West Africa reveal layers of sediment alternating between dust and organic material, proof that the desert has come and gone over and over in response to these orbital shifts. But precession alone is not enough to explain the abruptness of the transitions. Computer models suggest that feedback mechanisms, the albedo effect of sand reflecting sunlight, the loss of vegetation, increasing dust storms, changes in ocean circulation patterns, can trigger tipping points, where a gradual decline in rainfall suddenly accelerates into full desertification. The climate engine is powerful, but it is also fragile. Small perturbations can cascade into massive changes. The Green Sahara was not an anomaly. It was the planet operating exactly as designed, responding to the physics of motion and light. But another possibility emerges when we consider not just the mechanics, but the memory, the way ecosystems, and perhaps even human cultures, retain the imprint of these cycles long after the rains have ceased. Beneath the sands of Mauritania, buried under dunes that shift with every windstorm, flows a river that no human eye has seen for 5,000 years. It is called the Tamanrasset River System, and it is one of the most significant paleocanals ever discovered in the Sahara. At its peak, during the African humid period, this river drained a vast watershed stretching from the highlands of Algeria and Mali westward, across the desert to the Atlantic Ocean. It was, by some estimates, comparable in length to the modern Niger or Senegal rivers, a major artery of the Green Sahara's circulatory system. The river's existence was first suspected in the 1970s, when geologists noticed peculiar patterns in satellite imagery, faint linear features, barely visible, cutting across the desert in long, sinuous curves. Ground surveys confirmed what the satellites suggested. Beneath the sand lay ancient riverbeds, flanked by levees and terraces, filled with sediments that told the story of flowing water. Subsequent remote sensing, using advanced radar capable of penetrating several meters into the ground, revealed the full extent of the system. The Tamanrasset was not a single channel, but a network, a braided river with multiple tributaries, seasonal floodplains, and delta regions where it emptied into the Atlantic. Along its banks, archaeologists have found stone tools, pottery fragments, and the remains of settlements, suggesting that the river was a lifeline for the people of the Western Sahara. Other hidden rivers have been mapped as well. The Kafra River, which flowed from the Tibesti Mountains toward the Nile, the Ahar River, which drained the Tassili Plateau, the vast network of wadis in the Libyan desert, now dry but once flowing with seasonal torrents. Together, these channels form a hidden geography, a shadow map of the Sahara as it was, not a void, but a web of life. The discovery of these rivers has profound implications. It suggests that the Sahara, at its green peak, was not merely a savanna dotted with isolated oases, but a fully integrated hydrological system capable of supporting large populations and complex ecosystems. It also raises questions. What else lies buried? What other secrets does the desert hold, waiting for the right tools and the right questions to bring them to light? In the Erg of Bilma, a sea of sand in northern Niger, a geological survey team found something impossible: harpoons. They were not ancient in the way of stone tools, which can survive for hundreds of thousands of years. These harpoons were carved from bone, delicate and fragile, lying half buried in the sand like driftwood on a beach. Near them were fish vertebrae, large fish, freshwater species, the kind that thrive in rivers and lakes, the kind that no longer exist anywhere within 1,000 miles of this spot. The image is haunting. Fishermen standing knee-deep in a river that no longer flows, casting nets into water that has been gone for millennia. Their tools, left behind or lost, slowly buried by the advancing dunes, waiting to be found by people who would not recognize the landscape they once knew. This is one of countless such moments scattered across the Sahara, small, intimate glimpses of lives lived in a vanished world. A grinding stone, still stained with ochre from the pigments used to paint the rock art. A clay pot, intact, buried in the remains of a hearth. A necklace of ostrich eggshell beads, strung by hands that have been dust for 6,000 years. Each of these objects is a microstory, a fragment of narrative preserved by accident. The grinding stone tells of an artist preparing paint, mixing colors, imagining the image before it is painted. The pot tells of a meal shared, perhaps a celebration, perhaps an ordinary evening. The necklace tells of vanity, of beauty, of a universal human desire to adorn oneself, even in a wilderness. The Sahara is not empty. It is full of these ghosts, these small monuments to impermanence. The desert does not erase the past. It preserves it, waiting for someone to notice, to care, to remember. And in remembering, we bridge the gap between their world and ours, between water and sand, between abundance and absence. Meanwhile, far above, the same stars that guided the fishermen still wheel through the night sky, indifferent to the fortunes of rivers and dunes alike. The end, when it came, was not uniform. Some regions dried faster than others. The highland plateaus, which received orographic rainfall from passing storms, held out longer. The deep basins, where lakes had accumulated over millennia, persisted as oases for centuries after the surrounding land had turned to dust. But by 5,000 years ago, the transformation was undeniable. The monsoons had retreated to their modern boundaries. The rivers had ceased to flow. The lakes had shrunk to a fraction of their former size, their waters becoming increasingly saline as evaporation concentrated dissolved minerals. The vegetation, starved of moisture, withered and died. The topsoil, no longer held in place by roots, blew away in great dust storms that darkened the sky and choked the lungs of anyone still living in the region. Recent research suggests that the transition may have been even more abrupt than previously thought. Analysis of sediment cores from the Atlantic seafloor shows a sudden spike in dust deposition around 5,500 years ago, evidence of a rapid, possibly catastrophic shift. Some climate models propose that the desiccation of the Sahara was not a gradual decline, but a threshold event where feedback loops suddenly accelerated the process once a critical point was reached. One such feedback mechanism involves vegetation. Plants in the Sahara, as in any semi-arid region, play a crucial role in maintaining rainfall. They transpire moisture into the atmosphere, increasing local humidity and seeding clouds. They darken the surface, reducing albedo and increasing heat absorption, which drives convection and draws in moist air. When the vegetation began to die off, these effects weakened. Less moisture, less convection, less rain, which killed more plants, creating a vicious cycle. Another factor may have been changes in ocean circulation. The Atlantic multidecadal oscillation and other patterns of sea surface temperature can shift the position of the intertropical convergence zone, the belt of low pressure where the monsoons originate. A shift of just a few degrees latitude can mean the difference between rain and drought for the Sahara. Whatever the exact mechanisms, the result was the same. The desert returned, swifter and more complete than anyone could have imagined. The sands, held at bay for 9,000 years, reclaimed their dominion. And the people, the animals, the forests, the rivers, all became memories, buried beneath the dunes. What if there was more? What if, hidden beneath the sand, lie not just campsites and fishing villages, but cities, kingdoms, civilizations whose names were never written because they vanished before the invention of writing? This is the realm of speculation, of alternative theories that hover at the edges of mainstream archaeology. Some researchers point to Nabta Playa and similar sites as evidence of a pre-dynastic Saharan civilization, a culture advanced enough to build megalithic monuments and track the stars, yet lost to history because it left no written records and was buried by the desert. The argument goes like this. If the Green Sahara supported large populations for thousands of years, and if those populations developed pastoralism, astronomy, and monumental architecture, why wouldn't they also develop more complex forms of social organization? Why wouldn't there be proto-cities, trade networks, perhaps even proto-states? Conventional archaeology has been slow to embrace these ideas, in part because the evidence is so fragmentary. The Sahara is a difficult place to excavate. Sites are remote, often inaccessible, and constantly being reshaped by wind and sand. Many areas have never been surveyed, let alone excavated. The absence of evidence, in this case, may not be evidence of absence. There are tantalizing hints. In the Gilf Khyber, remote sensing has revealed geometric patterns, straight lines, rectangular enclosures that do not appear to be natural formations. In the Tenor, scattered pottery shards show a level of craftsmanship and decoration suggesting trade networks spanning hundreds of miles. And then there is the rock art itself, with its depictions of hierarchical scenes, ritual gatherings, and what some interpret as religious or political leaders. Could the knowledge that seeded Egyptian civilization have come not from scattered nomadic bands, but from a forgotten Saharan kingdom that collapsed when the rains failed? Could the myths of Atlantis, or the Egyptian legends of a primordial age when gods walked the earth, be distorted memories of this lost world? These are not mainstream theories. They require leaps of faith and interpretations of ambiguous evidence. But they capture something important, the sense that we have only begun to understand what the Green Sahara was and what it might have become if the climate had remained stable. As the climate shifted, so did the possibilities, and some possibilities, once lost, can never be recovered. As the rains began to fail, did the people of the Green Sahara look to the sky for answers? Did they notice the subtle shifts in the stars, the slow drift of the constellations, and wonder if the cosmos itself was changing? The megaliths of Nabta Playa, erected during the late phase of the African humid period, are aligned with remarkable precision. Some stones mark the cardinal directions. Others align with the heliacal rising of certain stars, the moment when a star first becomes visible on the eastern horizon just before dawn. The most famous alignment is with Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, whose appearance coincided with the Nile's annual flood in ancient Egypt. Was this a coincidence? Or did the architects of Nabta Playa understand the connection between celestial cycles and earthly seasons? Did they track the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble that was, unknown to them, the very cause of their land's transformation? Some researchers believe that the astronomical knowledge developed in the late Green Sahara was directly transmitted to Egypt, forming the foundation of the sophisticated sky-watching that characterized Egyptian religion and architecture. The pyramids famously aligned with Orion's belt, the temples of Karnak and Dendera with their intricate astronomical ceilings, the solar alignments of Abu Simbel, all of these could be the descendants of knowledge first encoded in the stones of the Sahara. There is even speculation, controversial but intriguing, that the constellation patterns we know today, the groupings of stars into mythological figures, were first formalized by Saharan astronomers. The ancient Egyptians, Mesopotamians, and Greeks may have inherited these patterns, along with the stories attached to them from a common source, the stargazers of the dying desert. What did they think, those last astronomers, as they stood beneath the vast Saharan sky and felt the dryness in the air, the lengthening of the seasons without rain? Did they see the changes in the heavens as omens? Did they pray to the stars for the return of the waters? Or did they simply record what they saw, meticulously, dispassionately, leaving a message for the future? We were here. We watched. We understood. Every culture that borders the Sahara has myths of water, stories of floods, of lost rivers, of fertile lands swallowed by sand. The Berbers speak of a time when their ancestors lived in green valleys before the desert claimed them. The Tuareg, the blue people of the Sahara, tell stories of ancient lakes and the spirits that haunt their dry shores. Even distant cultures, from the Levant to the Sahel, have legends that echo with the memory of climatic catastrophe. Could these myths be cultural memories passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years? Could they preserve, in symbolic form, the experience of living through the desertification of the Sahara? Consider the biblical story of the flood, or the even older Mesopotamian tale of Gilgamesh and the deluge sent by the gods. These are usually interpreted as memories of real floods, the inundation of the Black Sea basin, perhaps, or catastrophic flooding in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. But what if some of these myths also encode the opposite? Not too much water, but too little. The loss of a green world, a paradise, through the withdrawal of rain? In Egyptian mythology, the primordial world is described as an infinite ocean, none, from which the first land emerged, a mound of earth, the Benbin, on which the creator god stood to bring forth life. Is this a memory of the Nile's annual flood? Or is it an older memory, from a time when the Sahara itself was covered in lakes, and dry land was the exception rather than the rule? The concept of the field of reeds, the Egyptian afterlife, is often depicted as a lush green paradise with rivers and abundant crops, place utterly unlike the Egypt of the dynastic period where green land was limited to the narrow Nile floodplain. Could this vision of paradise be a cultural memory of the Green Sahara, transformed over millennia into a vision of the world beyond death? Myths are not history. They are distorted, symbolic, layered with generations of retelling. But they are not invented from nothing. They draw on experience, on the deep substrate of collective memory. And in the myths of water and stone that permeate the cultures around the Sahara, there may lie fragments of truth, the truth of a world, lost to time, remembered only in stories, told around fires beneath the stars. But another possibility emerges when we ask, what if the stories are not just memories, but prophecies? What if the people who told them understood instinctively that what the desert takes, it can also return?